It all started with a wedding dress in the rain. When Malcolm Hayes, a 42-year-old black mechanic, saw a woman walking barefoot along the highway in a soaked, extravagant white gown, he never imagined that offering her a ride would ignite a war with a millionaire. The woman, who introduced herself as Emily Turner, had just fled her own wedding. Behind the tears and ruined makeup was a terrified woman, escaping more than just an unwanted marriage. She was running from Blake Whitmore, a powerful real estate heir known for getting what he wants, no matter the cost. Malcolm, no stranger to injustice, recognized the desperation in Emily's eyes. Years earlier, he had lost his job due to discriminatory layoffs, but had fought back, building his own small garage on the edge of town. He wasn't about to let someone like Blake push another innocent person into submission. Not in his house. What seemed like an act of kindness quickly spiraled into threats, false accusations, and legal attacks. But Malcolm had something Blake underestimated: grit, intelligence, and a deep understanding of how to outlast those who use power as a weapon. As Emily slept on Malcolm's couch, safe for the first time in days, neither of them knew that their chance encounter would expose a hidden world of corruption and spark a battle that would shake an empire built on arrogance. And it all began with a ride in the rain. He thought she was just a runaway bride until her ex tried to destroy his entire life. 12 hours before his life turned upside down, Malcolm Hayes was just a quiet mechanic in Nottercombe, a small town outside Detroit. His garage wasn't flashy, but it was honest, built with his own hands after being laid off from a big auto shop that didn't want a black man on their front line. He'd fought too hard for his peace to imagine it would be shattered by a woman in a wedding dress. It was nearly 2 a.m. when he saw her barefoot, drenched, and shivering on the side of a rainy highway. Her mascara had run in thick black trails, but her eyes burned with something deeper than sorrow. Fear. "Please," she whispered as Malcolm rolled down the window. "I have nowhere to go." Her name was Emily Turner. She said she'd run away from her wedding just hours earlier, leaving behind luxury, diamonds, and a man named Blake Whitmore, a wealthy real estate heir with a temper and an ego. At first, Malcolm thought she was exaggerating. Rich people didn't usually run, but by the next morning, when 3 suited men stormed into his shop without knocking, he realized Emily hadn't told him the half of it. "Where's the boss's bride?" one of them snarled, scanning the room like he owned it. Malcolm stood tall. "I don't know what you're talking about." He did, of course. Emily was hiding in the back, trembling. But something in Malcolm's chest, something he'd built brick by brick after years of being underestimated, refused to back down. He'd faced racism, false accusations, and constant suspicion just for being a black man in a mechanic's uniform. And now, he was supposed to hand over a terrified woman to a man who treated people like property? Malcolm made them leave. And that night, he made Emily a promise. "You stay. If Blake wants something, he's going to have to come through me first." But Blake Whitmore wasn't done. Over the next few days, Malcolm's world started to collapse piece by piece. First, the police showed up at his shop with a bogus warrant, claiming they'd received an anonymous tip about stolen parts. Then customers began canceling appointments. By Wednesday, Malcolm's landlord arrived with a better offer, an eviction notice. Every attack was precise, expensive, and personal. Blake was using his money to bleed Malcolm out. But Malcolm wasn't a fool. He started documenting everything, recording conversations, noting license plates, photographing every suspicious visitor. And he discovered that Emily wasn't just running from a cruel fiancé. She was fleeing a criminal empire. Blake's charm and power masked a web of bribes, threats, and political corruption. Emily had proof, contracts, photographs, even conversations he had once shown her to impress her. She had saved them, never knowing she'd need them to survive. Malcolm took the evidence to Thomas Rivera, a journalist he knew from his younger days. Within hours, Tomas connected the dots. Blake wasn't just a bad fiancé. He was at the center of one of the city's largest real estate corruption schemes, using money and intimidation to crush small business owners like Malcolm. Blake's response was swift and brutal. He sued Malcolm for alienation of affection and interference with contractual relationships, demanding $200,000 in damages. But that lawsuit gave Malcolm something powerful, a legal right to access Blake's financial records during the discovery process. And that was when the game changed. Malcolm contacted Marcus Washington, a federal investigator who had also received multiple anonymous tips about Black-owned businesses. Malcolm handed over every piece of evidence, including the documentation Emily had risked her safety to collect: bribes, tax, fraud, property threats. It was enough to open a federal investigation. On Friday morning, Blake showed up in person, flanked by two intimidating men. The mask of civility finally dropped. "You have 48 hours to return what's mine," Blake hissed, "or accidents might start happening around here." But Malcolm didn't flinch. Calmly, he replied, "Thanks for being so clear. By the way, how was your meeting with the FBI yesterday?" Blake's face paled. Moments later, his phone rang. First a journalist, then the FBI, then his own secretary, telling him his accounts were frozen and his city contracts revoked. And finally, federal agents arrived and arrested him, right there on the oil-stained floor of Malcolm's shop. Emily stood in the doorway as Blake was led away in handcuffs. "You controlled everything I saw," she said quietly. "But I documented everything you hid." Malcolm smiled, remembering his father's words. "Be smarter than the people trying to break you." 6 months later, Malcolm and Emily stood side by side as they opened a second garage across town. They were married now, partners, not just in life, but in rebuilding what others tried to destroy. The man who thought he could ruin Malcolm with lawsuits and threats had become a cautionary tale, and the mechanic he once mocked was now a community hero, because some prey know how to hunt back. The rich man laughed at her accent. But what happened next silenced the entire room. Under the golden lights of Maison Belle, Manhattan's most exclusive French restaurant, the atmosphere pulsed with power. Crystalline chandeliers glimmered above tables of silk, napkins, whispered deals, and polished silverware. The air smelled of truffle oil and quiet entitlement. It was a room where no one expected to be challenged, especially not by a server. Zoe Brooks moved between tables with practiced grace. Dressed in the classic black and white uniform of a high-end waitress, she was invisible to most of the guests. That's how they liked it. That's how she preferred it. Until the night someone tried to humiliate her. At table 9 sat Preston Ashford, a real estate magnate with a net worth that matched his ego. Flanked by investors and socialites, he spoke loud enough to ensure the entire restaurant heard. To him, when he butchered the pronunciation of bouillabaisse with exaggerated flair, his table burst into laughter. Then he looked up at Zoe and smirked. "You can correct me if I'm wrong, sweetheart," he said mockingly. Zoe responded gently, with flawless French. The room fell silent. Preston blinked. Then came the laughter, this time from his table, at him. Something shifted. The tension, the gaze. For a split second, Zoe wasn't just a waitress. She was something more. But Preston wasn't a man to be challenged. His smile curled into something darker. "Impressive," he said coldly. "Didn't realize the help here came with an education." Zoe didn't respond. She simply walked away. But she knew this wasn't over. What Preston, and nearly everyone in that room, didn't know was that Zoe Brooks held a master's degree in linguistics. She had once delivered a keynote at the Geneva Forum on multilingual diplomacy. She spoke 6 languages fluently, but life had shifted after her mother fell ill and her younger brother needed care. Zoe had traded podiums and policy rooms for late-night shifts and ignored brilliance. And yet, she never stopped observing. Later that evening, as Zoe cleared plates near the kitchen, she overheard Preston speaking, crudely about her. "That girl's sharp tongue is going to cost her more than tips," he sneered. "People like her should know their place." That's when another voice interrupted, this time from a corner table. "I couldn't agree more," said an older woman with a thick European accent. "People should know their place, especially when they insult someone who once translated diplomatic accords at the UN." The room froze. Everyone turned toward the voice. It was Madame Delacroix, a French ambassador's wife and one of Maison Belle's most respected patrons. She stood slowly and looked directly at Zoe. "You studied at Sciences Po, yes?" she asked softly. Zoe nodded, unsure. Delacroix smiled. "I remember your lecture in Geneva. Your argument on language as the bridge between cultures was revolutionary. What are you doing here?" Zoe paused. "Taking care of my family," she said simply. Delacroix turned to Preston. "You should be ashamed. This young woman has more intellect in her silence than you have in your entire investment portfolio." That night, something happened that no one could have predicted. A video clip of the two moment, captured by a bystander, went viral. The hashtag number Zoe Speaks began trending. Within 72 hours, Zoe received over a dozen messages from Ivy League deans, cultural institutes, even the UN itself, offering her positions, grants, and opportunities. But she didn't rush to accept. Instead, she called a friend, Elijah Carter, a civil rights lawyer. With his help, she launched something bigger than herself: the Invisible Talents Initiative, a platform designed to identify and elevate overlooked professionals in the propers service industry: cleaners, servers, janitors, people with degrees, knowledge, and passion, but no opportunity. In an interview a week later, Zoe said, "This isn't about me correcting a rich man's French. It's about the systems that make brilliance invisible when it wears an apron." Meanwhile, Preston's world unraveled. Investors pulled out. His firm's PR crisis team couldn't contain the backlash. Delacroix's public support for Zoe had triggered a domino effect, and suddenly Preston found himself uninvited from the very rooms where he used to boast. But Zoe didn't rejoice. She wasn't interested in revenge. She was focused on rebuilding. A month later, she returned to Maison Belle, not to serve, but to host a private gala. The waitstaff that night wore pins that read, "Ask me what I do outside this job." Zoe opened the event with a quiet, poised speech. "For years, I served tables where no one asked my name. I was seen, but never seen. Tonight, I stand before you not because I corrected someone's French, but because I refused to let someone's prejudice define my potential." The room erupted in applause. Madame Delacroix stepped forward and embraced her. Preston wasn't in the room. He had resigned from his company after more allegations surfaced of discrimination, financial misconduct, and silencing whistleblowers. Some people said Zoe's moment had ruined him, but Zoe disagreed. "I didn't ruin him," she told a journalist. "He did that to himself. All I did was speak, and in doing so, she proved something the world often forgets. Dignity has no uniform. Talent has no title. And the right voice spoken at the right moment can shake the walls of privilege." He challenged the janitor to a sparring match. What he didn't know shocked the whole gym. It was supposed to be just another Wednesday night at Iron Fist Martial Arts Academy. Students were warming up, instructors barked orders, and the air was thick with sweat and ambition. In the back, quietly mopping the floor as always, was James Washington, the janitor. He moved with deliberate calm, his eyes occasionally drifting to the sparring sessions, but never interrupting. To most people, James was invisible, just another old man in coveralls. But to Derek Mitchell, a young black belt with more ego than experience, James was something else, a target for a joke. Hey, old man, Derek shouted across the gym, tossing his towel over his shoulder. You ever hold a pair of gloves, or are you just here to sweep up after real fighters? A few students chuckled nervously. James didn't respond. He just kept mopping. Derek wasn't done. Come on, just for fun. One round. Let's see if you're as slow as you. Look. Everyone stopped. The gym went quiet. Sarah Lee, a jiu-jitsu student and psychology grad student, stepped forward. Derek, that's not funny. But James raised his hand. It's all right, he said softly. I'll spar with him. One condition. He apologizes afterward. That made Derek laugh even harder. You're on, janitor. The coach shrugged, thinking it'd be good entertainment. James slowly stepped into the ring. He didn't stretch. He didn't bounce. He just stood calmly. The bell rang. What happened next stunned the room. Derek lunged with a showy jab. James sidestepped effortlessly, almost bored. Derek tried again, this time with a spinning kick. James leaned back just enough for it to miss by an inch. Then came a flurry of punches, left, right, hook. None of them touched James. In fact, James hadn't thrown a single punch. He didn't need to. Every time Derek attacked, James was already gone like. He knew the move before it happened. Within 2 minutes, Derek was winded, frustrated, and humiliated. James stepped forward and whispered, You done? Derek swung wildly. That's when James moved. One fluid step, one gentle sweep. Derek was on the mat, staring up at the lights, breathless. James offered a hand. Derek slapped it away, but the message was clear. The match was over. Sarah quickly opened her phone and typed James Washington MMA. The search results exploded onto the screen. Oh my God, she whispered. He's Silent Storm. The entire gym crowded around. James Washington, 5-time undefeated MMA world champion, retired after a mysterious disappearance from the public eye. Now working as a janitor. The coach's face turned pale. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear. James quietly stepped down from the ring and returned to his mop bucket. That night, no one mocked him again. The next day, Sarah approached him. Why here? Why now? James shrugged, needed peace. Wanted to be around martial arts again. This place had an opening. She smiled. Would you consider teaching? Not just moves, character. These kids need someone like you. James thought for a moment, then nodded. 3 months later, James was the most respected instructor at Iron Fist. His classes weren't flashy. He didn't shout, but every student left with more than technique. They left with discipline, respect, and humility. And Derek? Derek eventually apologized. He stayed in the gym but no longer strutted. He trained harder, listened more, and credited James for making him a better fighter and a better man. The story of James Silent Storm Washington spread like wildfire. News outlets tried to interview him. He declined. Let the story stay in the gym, he said. Instead, James and Sarah co-founded Storm Within, a youth program teaching martial arts and mental strength to kids from underserved communities. Not everyone has to fight, James said during their launch. But everyone needs to learn how not to be broken. He never sought fame, but his quiet power spoke louder than any championship belt. The maid answered a phone call in Dutch, and it changed her life forever. Zoe Johnson was invisible. At least, that's how the executives at the Grand Regal Hotel treated her. She was a black maid in a starched uniform, moving through hallways with quiet efficiency, polishing silverware no one would thank her for, and cleaning rooms where no one remembered her face. But behind her silence was a woman the world had overlooked, until one phone call in Dutch changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Zoe was finishing the turn-down service in Suite 1403 when her phone buzzed. The call was from Leiden University, urgent, academic, and in fluent Dutch. She answered instinctively, switching from English to her native fluency, her voice low but precise. She didn't know that someone was listening. Richard Coleman, the billionaire owner of the Grand Regal chain, was passing by the service corridor when he heard the rapid Dutch conversation. He stopped in his tracks. A maid, speaking flawless Dutch? Intrigued, he asked his assistant to find out her name. But Zoe didn't hear about that right away. What she did hear was her supervisor's angry voice, an hour later. "You're not allowed to take personal calls during service hours. You've been written up." It wasn't the first time Zoe had been punished for minor infractions. Others got warnings. Zoe got penalties. The next day, she was summoned to the top floor, not to be reprimanded, but to meet the man himself. "I'm Richard Coleman," the tall, sharply dressed man said as she stepped into the office. "I overheard your conversation yesterday. You speak Dutch?" Zoe nodded cautiously. "Yes. And French, Spanish, Mandarin, and Swahili." Richard blinked. "May I ask why you're cleaning rooms when you're clearly qualified for something more?" Zoe's answer was quiet. Because no one's ever asked. Her resume had once included a master's in linguistics, a published thesis on cultural translation, and years of academic honors. But after her mother's illness and her younger brother's custody battle, Zoe had dropped out of academia to support her family. Richard offered her a new position immediately. Coordinator for an upcoming international summit, hosted by the hotel. Zoe hesitated. "Only if I don't have to be anyone's token. I want to work, not be paraded." Richard respected that. In the following weeks, Zoe excelled. Her ability to coordinate multilingual guests, handle high-pressure tasks, and translate between executives stunned everyone except her. She had always known her worth. Now the world was finally catching up, but with visibility came enemies. Thomas Whitmore, the hotel's VP of operations, saw Zoe's rise as a threat. He, along with Sarah Richards, the marketing head, had long ruled the upper floors through nepotism and quiet racism. They began digging into Zoe's past, hoping to find something discrediting. Instead, Zoe found them first. One night, she discovered an internal folder left open on a conference laptop. It revealed a network of nepotistic contracts. Millions in hotel funds funneled to friends and family of top executives, including Whitmore and Richards. The more she looked, the worse it got. Forged invoices, fake service providers, bribes disguised as consulting fees. Zoe didn't go to HR. She went to Richard. "I'm not here to burn this place down," she told him, "but I won't let it keep standing on lies." Richard was shocked, but also impressed. He asked Zoe what she thought should happen. Expose the system, clean house, and rebuild something that recognizes talent, where it lives, not where it comes from. The next week, during a company-wide meeting, Zoe was introduced as the new vice president of diversity and international relations. Richard stood beside her as she presented. The full audit. Resignations followed. Investigations were launched. Whitmore and Richards left in disgrace. But Zoe's victory wasn't personal. It was structural. 6 months later, she launched the Invisible Talents Program, a nationwide initiative designed to identify overlooked hotel workers with hidden degrees, skills, and qualifications. Dozens of maids became managers. Former bellhops became concierge leads. And Zoe? She became the face of a quiet revolution. At a press conference, a journalist asked her how it felt to go from maid to executive. "I was always both," she replied. "But now the world can finally see it." He invited the black cleaning lady as a joke, but she walked in like a queen and took back everything. The marble floors of the Lancaster Estate ballroom gleamed under chandeliers worth more than most people's homes. Laughter flowed with the champagne, but it wasn't the kind that warmed hearts. It was the kind meant to cut. When Victoria Temps walked into the room, silence fell. Not because she looked out of place, but because she looked nothing like the woman they thought she was. She wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her frame with regal grace, her natural curls pinned high, her eyes sharp and calm. But the guests didn't see elegance. They saw scandal. Because Victoria was the cleaning lady, the one they'd all ignored. And tonight, she'd been invited, not out of kindness, but as a cruel joke, by Richard Blackwood. Richard, the late patriarch's arrogant son and current head of the Blackwood estate, had smirked when he sent the invitation. "Let's give her a taste of high society," he told his wife, thinking Victoria would either decline or come looking pitiful. He never imagined she'd show up looking like she owned the place. Because, as it turned out, she did. For 2 years, Victoria had worked quietly as a cleaner at Blackwood Properties, pushing carts, polishing silver, and listening. She endured whispers, endured insults. What they didn't, was that her real name was Victoria Temps, Blackwood, daughter of Robert Blackwood, the half-brother Richard had erased from the family tree. She hadn't come for revenge. She had come for justice. As murmurs spread through the ballroom, Richard strutted to the center of the floor and lifted his glass. Well, look who accepted my invitation," he said, voice dripping with mozzarella. Victoria smiled softly. "I did, and I brought something with me." From her purse, she pulled out a small velvet-lined box and opened it. Inside was a gold family ring identical to the one Richard wore. She held it up, and gasps rippled through the blank room. "This ring was my father's," she said. "Robert Blackwood, the man your father disinherited, the man you pretend never existed." Richard's smirk faltered. "I have DNA evidence. A notarized will your father tried to suppress. And," she turned to the bros. "Crowd. 2 eyewitnesses who can confirm the night Richard forced Robert out, then falsified documents to take full control of the company." The air turned icy. "Lies," Richard barked. "She's making this up." "Am I?" Victoria interrupted, her voice rising, not in anger but with righteous fire. "Then, why did you bribe Dr. Hamilton to bury my father's medical records? Why did your attorney forge those property transfers days after Robert's death?" A man in the corner stepped forward. David Chun, an inheritance attorney. "She's telling the truth. I've reviewed all the documents. Legally, Victoria is the rightful majority heir of the Blackwood estate." Panic broke across Richard's face. Helena Blackwood, his wife, looked at him in horror. "You told me she was lying, that her father was just some squatter." Victoria stepped forward. "I spent 2 years working as a cleaning lady, documenting everything, every bribe, every misused fund, every insult you hurled at me while I quietly collected the truth. And now," she took a deep breath, "I'm taking back what was stolen." That night, Richard Blackwood was arrested, charged with embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. His accounts frozen, his name dragged into public disgrace. But Victoria, she didn't just claim her inheritance. She transformed it. As the new CEO of Blackwood Holdings, she implemented reforms from the ground up, starting with a full audit of hiring practices, wage equality, and ethical oversight. She launched Project Rise, an initiative to support formerly incarcerated individuals and single people, mothers re-entering the workforce. Her first order of business, turning the Grand Ballroom into a public event space for community programs. 6 months later, a child ran through that same hall with laughter instead of cruelty. Volunteers packed meals, artists held exhibits, and at the center of it all stood Victoria. No longer in uniform, but never forgetting where she came from. In an interview with Forbes, she said, "I didn't fight to sit in their seats. I fought to build a new table." A little black girl fixed a billionaire's car, but the ring on her finger unlocked a ring. Hidden past. It was supposed to be a quick roadside stop, nothing more. The kind of inconvenience that annoyed people like Andrew Whitaker, a billionaire CEO with no time to waste. His vintage Mustang had stalled on the edge of a quiet neighborhood in Baltimore. Frustrated, he popped the hood, staring blankly at the engine as rain began to fall. That's when he heard the voice. Need some help, mister? He turned, and there she was. A little black girl, maybe 10 years old, in overalls, 2 sizes, too big and grease already on her fingers. Her name was Maya Johnson. And within minutes, she had diagnosed the problem, a faulty coil, and fixed it with nothing more than a screwdriver, a hairpin, and sheer instinct. But it wasn't just her mechanical brilliance that stunned Andrew. It was the ring. On Maya's finger was a silver band, etched with a Greek letter and a tiny flame symbol, the exact ring Andrew had given to a little girl named Jade in a Boston orphanage 12 years ago. His breath caught. "Where did you get that ring?" he asked. Maya hesitated. "My mom gave it to me. Said a man named Andrew promised to come back. For me once." The words hit Andrew like a freight train. Years ago, before he became CEO of Whitaker Enterprises, Andrew had volunteered at Little Partis, Angel's Orphanage. There, he'd met Jade, a precocious, mechanically gifted girl who stole his heart with her intelligence and hope. He had vowed to help her, even began the process of adopting her. But his father, Howard Whitaker, the real power behind the empire, had forbidden it. Behind closed doors, Howard had secretly conducted experiments on orphan children, seeking to develop high-performance cognitive traits. Jade had disappeared soon after, and the Warren-Steet orphanage was mysteriously shut down. Andrew had buried the past, until now. Maya, he realized, was Jade's daughter. Driven by guilt and curiosity, Andrew began investigating. What he found was horrifying. His father had covered up years of abuse and experimentation at 5 different facilities. Children had been used, discarded, or vanished without explanation. And Jade, Maya's mother, had been one of them. She had escaped, changed her name, and raised Maya in secret before dying of complications linked to the experiments. With the help of Maya, now a self-taught young inventor, and a determined journalist named Marcus Hayes, Andrew gathered every document, every hidden file, and every voice memo his father thought was erased. Together, they organized a live press conference. The day of the broadcast, Maya stood at the podium, holding up her ring. "This was a promise," she said. "A promise to protect. And a promise that people like me wouldn't be forgotten." What followed was a bombshell. The Whitaker legacy crumbled overnight. Howard was arrested for conspiracy, child endangerment, fraud, and murder. Andrew stepped down from the company, but not in disgrace. He used his entire inheritance to launch the Prometheus Initiative, a fund supporting gifted children from underserved communities. And Maya? She became the face of a new future. By the age of 16, she had secured 5 patents. Her invention, the Lightcore engine, designed to reduce emissions by 70%, was featured on the cover of Scientific American. She opened the Johnson Center for Young Inventors on the exact grounds where Little Angel's orphanage once stood. In a televised interview, Maya was asked how it felt to go from an unknown girl fixing cars to leading scientific innovation. She smiled and said, "It all started with a promise, one that got broken, but then got rebuilt, stronger. Sometimes, justice begins with a ring and a flat tire." They thought he was just the maid's son until he Saturday at the chessboard. The Whitman estate was glowing that evening, filled with elite guests, string quartets, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. In a corner stood Carmen Santos, the black housekeeper, discreetly arranging plates with her usual quiet dignity. No one paid attention to her or her son, Diego, who waited nearby in a pressed shirt and old sneakers. That is, until Victoria Whitman, the heiress hosting the party, smirked and called out, "Why don't you join us, Diego? Let's see if the maid's boy knows how to play chess." Laughter followed, but Diego just nodded, sat down, and calmly moved his pawn. What Victoria didn't know was that Diego Santos was a self-taught chess prodigy. He'd spent years studying grandmaster games at the public library, while his mother worked double shifts. 10 minutes into the match, the laughter faded. 20 minutes later, Victoria was sweating. 30 minutes, and her king was cornered. Checkmate. The room erupted. But Diego didn't gloat. He simply stood, shook her hand, and walked away. That night, a congresswoman in the audience took notice. By morning, Diego's life had changed forever. Never underestimate someone based on where they come from or what they wear. True brilliance, like Diego's, often grows in silence, waiting for a moment to shine. If this story touched your heart, comment below. What would you do if someone underestimated you? Share your thoughts, like the video, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that prove dignity always wins. Your story might be the next checkmate to injustice.